Welcome back to Sage Connections. Today, we're diving into a powerful topic that impacts every woman moving through midlife: muscle health during menopause. I'm joined once again by Dr. Suzanna Paris, a naturopathic doctor and a podcast favorite. Together, we'll explore how to build and maintain muscle during menopause, the role of nutrition and lifestyle, and how physical therapy and naturopathic medicine can work hand in hand. Whether you're already lifting weights or just thinking about getting started, this conversation will give you practical tools and confidence to feel stronger than ever in this season of your life. Enjoy. Why do you think muscle mass and strength are such important and critical things to focus on during menopause?
We oftentimes think about hormones as it comes to things like reproduction and our periods, but hormones play such a critical role in muscle mass and in muscle function. And generally, as we age, we lose anywhere between 5% and 10% of our muscle mass every single decade. To put that in perspective, the average woman has about 30% muscle mass throughout her life as part of a percentage of her body weight. And in her 30s, we typically lose about 3% per decade. So that is nearly tripling for some women when menopause happens. So where muscle is really critical is it plays a really big role in our metabolism. So our muscle has little mitochondria in it, which are these little energetic batteries in the cells. And one of the things that that does is it makes energy and it creates heat. And so one of the reasons that we see that menopausal weight gain in a lot of women is because of that muscle mass decreasing. So building muscle, building strength is one of the most important things that we can do to maintain our weight. So I'm appealing to the vanity piece here for a lot of women because that's a big concern that comes up. Of like, I've gained 20 pounds overnight, literally. The other thing is bone health. So the more muscle we have, the more tension we have on the bone, the more we're pulling on that bone, which is causing that bone to continue to turn over. As we lose muscle mass, we're not getting that tension anymore. And so we end up with a higher risk of osteopenia, which is bone loss and osteoporosis, and obviously a higher risk of things like fractures and falls. As far as daily living and independence goes, I think it's not something that most women are thinking about in their mid 40s and 50s. But if you've ever gone into an assisted living facility, you can kind of look at what happens when we don't build that strength and structure over time. We lose mobility, which eventually does just translate in our 70s and 80s to losing our independence, not being able to live independently, being dependent on other people, needing assisted ambulation like walkers and wheelchairs. So that is not the way that we would necessarily want to go out of this world. And the last point that I'll point out is mood. Things like depression, anxiety, insomnia can sometimes really skyrocket in those perimenopausal, menopausal years. And a lot of the data shows that weight training and exercise and building more muscle can really help to offset the hot flashes, the night sweats, the irritability, the anger, and all of those things that sometimes will accompany these periods of transition.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll definitely get into the actual strength and resistance training in a little bit. But from a naturopathic medicine perspective, what role does nutrition and supplementation play in supporting muscle growth and recovery during menopause?
That's a great question. So the first thing I always focus on with patients is protein. Most of my patients, and I'm sure you see this with yours as well, are not getting adequate amounts of protein in order to even maintain muscle, let alone build muscle. The RDA, which is, very, very low, is basically set for a relatively sedentary person. And the formula that they recommend is like 0.8 grams per kilogram. And that is just to maintain muscle if you're not doing anything. There's a lot of different formulas out there on how to calculate it, but ideally we're looking at somewhere between 1.4 to 1.8, and some sources will argue as much as 2.2 grams per kilogram, which if you calculate that, it's well over 100 grams for the average woman. And the reason that protein is so important is that protein contains those amino acids in order to build muscle, but we also need those amino acids for every other cellular function in the body. So if those needs are not being met, the body is going to go looking elsewhere for that protein and those amino acids, and it is going to take it from muscle. So I am not vegetarian, I'm not vegan, so I do advocate really good, clean sources of animal protein because I do think that for the average person, A, they're easier to find, and B, they're a little bit easier to assimilate. So I typically will focus on things like pasture raised eggs if they tolerate eggs okay, pasture raised poultry, grass fed beef. If they tolerate dairy, something like an organic grass fed cottage cheese can give them a pretty big bang for the buck. So focusing on protein, number one. Number two, looking at an anti inflammatory diet. So estrogen is highly anti inflammatory. And again, as that estrogen goes down, we tend to see higher amounts of inflammation happening in the body. That could be aches and pains. That could be things like bursitis, tendonitis, just feeling all around. Women will say, like, I feel like my body literally fell apart overnight, right? I don't know if you've heard that as well, but
Hmm.
that's something that they will oftentimes say of like everything hurts all the time. So an anti-inflammatory diet, there's a lot of resources out there, but I would say stick to the basics, right? Look at things like organic fruits and vegetables. Look at things like pasture-raised protein. Nuts and seeds can be really helpful, though. In excessive amounts, they can be a little bit more pro-inflammatory. And looking at things to avoid. So looking at things like processed sugar, avoiding things like soda pop. Caffeine is kind of in a little bit of a gray zone because, again, oftentimes it can spike cortisol, which can also increase inflammation. And then from a supplement standpoint, the one thing I really always recommend is creatine. Have you heard of creatine before?
Absolutely.
So it's probably the best research supplement because it's been around for so long. And we can talk about this a little bit more when we get into like the myths around supplementation. But there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of myths and misconceptions, which I'll help to clear up a little bit. But essentially, what creatine does is it helps to repair muscle. It's the primary fuel for the muscles to rebuild. So it can help rebuild muscle. It can help with strength. It can help with stamina. It can help with endurance. And some of the interesting research on creatine too is that it can also improve lean body mass composition, even if you're not doing anything. Not that I'm going to advocate doing that.
Right. So let me ask you this. So if the general run-of-the-mill recommendation is zero point 0.8 grams per uh, 1
Kilogram.
kilogram,
Mhm.
yeah, of weight, what is there an ideal recommendation for how much protein anybody should have to not just maintain muscle mass, but to gain muscle mass?
Yeah, I would say it's closer to the 1.8 grams per kilogram. And it depends on what the woman is doing as well. I mean, some women are doing more gentle exercises like swimming, yoga, body weight exercises like lunges, squats, planks. I would say for them, 1.4 to 1.8. But if somebody is actively lifting heavy 3 days a week, I would probably say higher up in the 2.0, 2.2 grams per kilogram.
Wow. I think a lot of people would be surprised because that's a lot. It's
It's a lot.
compared to what we think of we should have. Now, there's some controversy, I think, on is it per kilogram or per pound, which changes the formula a
Yeah.
little bit. Is there a per pound since most people are going to be in the US listening to this? Is there a per pound
There
form?
is a per pound. I'll have to look it
We
up.
can look it
I
up.
know there's a newer one that came out in the last 6 to 12 months that was using more of a per pound conversion.
Hmm.
And that one was also based on ideal body weight, not current body weight. I'll have to look that one up and we can always kind of post that in the link below.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to, yeah, like if you're 50 kilograms,
Mhm.
you are what is that? Is it 120 pounds? About that?
110.
110 pounds. Yeah, so first if you're 110 pounds, you should be moving kind of toward if you're lifting at 110 pounds,
Yeah.
you should be consuming about 100 uh right? Yeah, 100,
You're looking at 80. So if you're basing it on a 110-pound woman, right?
yeah.
If you want to be looking at lifting, so we'll do the average. We're looking at like we'll use the lower number, 1.4,
Yeah.
123 grams of protein,
Yeah.
which when I say that to patients seems like a lot. They're like, there is no way that I can get 123 grams. But you got to think about how easily we're able to find 123 grams of carbs, right? Like
Right.
between here and me walking upstairs, I can probably find that right in the candy dish over there, like very, very, very easily.
Yeah.
And the importance too with protein that a lot of people may not know is from a caloric standpoint, you're looking at the exact same amount of calories per gram. I'm not huge on calories, that's a separate conversation. But from a calories per gram standpoint, you're getting the same amount of calories per gram for protein and for carbs. So
Okay.
the protein versus the carbs is also going to keep you feeling fuller a lot longer, and it's also going to help with stabilizing blood sugar. That is the other nutritional piece that I think is so important in menopause and perimenopause, is to try and keep the blood sugar in that A1C, which is a marker of diabetes and prediabetes,
Mm.
as low as possible. Because what we also see in this period is a trend towards insulin resistance. So women will say, I'm eating the exact same foods and I'm gaining weight. And that's because as hormones decline, the body has a tendency to become much more insulin resistant. Therefore, the weight goes up. The more weight we have, the more inflammation we have, the more weight we have. Obviously, the harder it is on things like bones and joints, as far as pain goes as well.
So it's the perfect segue. So, my next question was going to be, how do hormonal changes in menopause impact women, and how they respond to strength training? We kind of talked about the diet piece, but, sort of compared to earlier in their life, how did those hormonal changes change how they respond to lifting?
Yeah, so definitely can be a little bit more challenging if a woman is completely new to the exercise front. A lot of women will again note more increase in pain because we have estrogen receptors literally everywhere in our body. So it's not just our reproductive system and our brains that are impacted. I think that's the part that's the most talked about. But we have estrogen receptors on our tendons, our ligaments, our muscles, our bones. The discs in our back have estrogen receptors, which makes it more likely to injure a disc. And so what we see is more tendonitis in this period because those tendons and ligaments become a little bit more brittle and a little bit more prone to injury. So we tend to see things like, tennis elbow, golfer's elbow presenting, even if women aren't really doing golfing or tennis or any of those things. Definitely there's a decrease in strength and a decrease in muscle. So if women, again, are newer to weight training, they might just want to start really, really, really slow. They might want to work with a trainer. They might want to get an accountability partner. They may not want to go super hard right out of the gate. And then the other thing that we see because of the joint breakdown is we tend to see a little bit more osteoarthritis. So we'll see more pain in the hips, we'll see more pain in the knees. And that is even just outside of exercise. That might be typical things like walking upstairs suddenly feels a little bit more painful. And so I think that these changes can be really, really discouraging for women because what I will oftentimes hear is, well, I can't exercise because I have joint pain or because I have tendonitis. So I still always advocate, work with a personal trainer, work with a coach, do something because doing nothing at this stage really does become a huge snowball effect.
And one thing I want to add in terms of diagnoses that are common in menopause and perimenopause is actually frozen shoulder for adhesive capsulitis. So it's essentially inflammation of that shoulder joint, which you just spoke about why that happens, right? So another common thing I see as a physical therapist is kind of an uptick of that diagnosis.
And I think that they've actually in the last couple of years come out with a ICD code diagnosis, which is something along the lines of like, menopausal musculoskeletal disorder. And we're seeing a little bit more information on that percolating, including things like, the gluteal tendinopathies that tend to creep up, which is like pain in the hips, pain in the buttock region. That again, for a lot of women seems to come out of nowhere, and it's not aggravated or exacerbated by anything that they've done. They just one day literally wake up with it, in the same way that some days they wake up with frozen shoulder one morning.
Absolutely. So, what are some strategies that help women overcome barriers during this time, like fatigue, sleep disturbance, the joint pain that we were talking about, that can interfere with consistent exercise, which they need, and we just talked about the amazing benefits that it has.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a really difficult time for a lot of women because, again, they're more fatigued, their sleep is much more disrupted. So the idea of doing something doesn't sound appealing. And then now they're not moving, so they're not sleeping as well. And the whole thing kind of snowballs. So, from the standpoint of fatigue, there's a lot of things that we can do. The first place I always look at is I do look at blood work because, yes, even though we know that the estrogen and the progesterone and very likely the testosterone levels are also declining, we have to also take into account some of those other hormones, like the adrenal hormones. We want to take into account the thyroid hormones, which affect energy and metabolism. And then I always want to be screening for things like basic nutritional deficiencies of things like B12, iron, vitamin D, which essentially is gas in the tank of the car, right? So oftentimes in perimenopause, we always look at those hormones and say, well, it must just be the hormones. But I want to look at it a bit more comprehensively and remember that you can have more than one thing wrong with you and that there can be multiple systems that are being affected at this time. So definitely doing a full panel to look at other areas. Maximizing nutrition when it comes to fatigue. Nutrition is gas in the tank of the car. And for a lot of women, they may have gotten away with, excuse my French, piss poor nutrition for a really, really long time. And this period of life can be the metaphorical mirror to be like, oh, like you can't do this anymore, right? So making sure that you're putting proper gas in the tank of the car. It's an analogy that I use with my patients all the time, which is you would not put the wrong gas in your car or wood chips in your car or pop in your car and get in the car and expect it to run in the morning, right? So what you're putting in is going to impact what you're getting out. So that just goes back to everything we talked about of getting adequate protein, balancing your blood sugar. Having good solid meals is a really big one for fatigue. A lot of my patients will graze all day long. They kind of just snack, they kind of pick, they're never really hungry. And that to me is like the equivalent of putting kindling on a fire constantly, right? You're going to have this low grade fire that's burning, but it is a lot more efficient to have 2 or 3 solid meals, which is more like putting a log on the fire and letting that burn. Because where that also can be really important is to get that insulin down, right? You're going to get the blood sugar going up, the insulin going up, but then you're going to have hours for it to come back down again versus the frequent snacking, which is just going to keep those sugars elevated all the time. So, testing for sure, nutrition, absolutely. You've known me long enough. I'm big on light and how light can impact our energy levels and our sleep. So, getting outside into morning light, even in Michigan, even when it's cloudy, even when it's gray, going for a 10-minute walk will allow our energy levels to be better during the day. And it will also set us up for better sleep at night. Obviously, if a woman is not sleeping, we'll look at sleep hygiene, dimming the lights at night, getting off of blue devices, blocking blue light. Things like magnesium can be really helpful. Things like Epsom salt baths can be really helpful. Setting ourselves up for proper sleep, because I don't think we do that. I think, if for anybody listening who has children, that there is a sleep routine, right? You do a bath, you dim the lights, you read them a story, you massage their feet, you tuck them into bed. You don't just throw a child into bed with the lights on and expect them to fall asleep. And so that is really, really, really imperative. And then the other thing, with the joint pain is to still move, right? So not moving does not always necessarily make the joint pain better. Women may just want to look for more gentle forms of exercise, whether it's yoga, maybe they're starting with some gentle resistance bands that are relatively low weight, possibly just going for walks, using a weighted vest, but moving even when the motivation isn't there is a really big one. And if they are having a lot of joint pain and musculoskeletal pain, we can always look at things like high dose fish oils as an anti-inflammatory. We can always look at turmeric. We can always look at boswellia to create that bridge for them to get them from being able to, to actually move, right? To get them from being sedentary to movement, because there comes a tipping point. Like I said, muscle is highly anti-inflammatory. And so when we don't have muscle, we are more inflamed. The more fat we have, the more inflamed we are. And so if we do nothing, we're going to continue that snowball of inflammation. So it's really important to move to get that circulation going. Also, from a cardiovascular standpoint, I'll just segue there really quickly. We know that heart disease does go up in menopause. And so making sure that blood is circulating is a really imperative part of that. So, yeah, that's my take on that.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I just want to kind of solidify that point that you made. That's very correct. And keep moving. Really, I think there's a big misconception when we are in pain that we don't want to move. But in reality, that is the thing that's going to help us to get out of that state. And on top of that, I do want to just really emphasize the fact that it's never too late to start strength training, whether it is resistance bands or weightlifting. It's always there, and there is research to support that we can still build muscle in this phase of life. And so if you haven't been a lifter or somebody that exercises on a regular basis their whole life, it's never too late to start. And with what I do, with the pelvic floor, those are also muscles. Those are also muscles and it's just in a place of the body that we don't typically see or measure, but same thing. If, with menopause, those muscles do lose some integrity, just like everywhere else. And so we can have symptoms in the pelvic floor of prolapse or of stress incontinence, urgency, things like that. And part of that has to do, because we're talking about the body as a whole when we're losing estrogen. And so that part of the body is also affected. And there is ways to strengthen that part of your body as well. So finally, we could keep talking about this and we will
I
keep
have one
talking
quick
about.
question for you.
Yes, yes, go
Do you
ahead.
do you find with your clients that sometimes they will say that they don't want to train because of their pelvic floor issues?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
because sometimes they have that incontinence. If they don't understand how to pressure manage correctly,
Mhm.
which is a lot of times how prolapse symptoms can get worse if they, let's say they had some prolapse with childbearing, for
Mhm.
example, it does get worse if they're not managing their pressure correctly, specifically with heavy lifting. And so they will back off of that because they're experiencing, that the bulging or even that stress incontinence. Especially plyometric exercises, any kind
Mhm.
of jumping exercise, right? That can kind of induce urgency and a feeling like they're going to kind of leak and lose it a little bit. But
Is
they're
there a way for those women to breathe in a different way when they're
100%.
strength training? Because I think a lot of my patients I know have very dysfunctional breathing patterns. Is there something that you can kind of recommend to our viewers on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is my bread and butter. This is what I do with every single patient that comes through the door with pelvic floor dysfunction is we learn how to breathe and coordinate the pelvic floor with the breathing first and foremost. And then we move that into more of a functional activity, whether it is with lifting or whatever else they want to do. Um, yeah, I coordinate diaphragmatic breathing because a lot of us, and we've talked about this before, we
Mhm.
kind of get stuck in the sympathetic state where we're stressed out and we're breathing with our accessory muscles, with our chest. And my job is to kind of rewire that and have people breathe more with their diaphragm. And then the pelvic floor coordinates with the diaphragmatic breathing. And so if we can do that, we can then put that into any activity that they want to do. Even if it's sit to stand from, they're eating and they get up, you know, to everything from that to going to the gym and lifting heavy weights.
I think that's a really great point. I think it's a really good segue too to how important stress management is for everyone, right? We live in this world where we're 24/7 on all the time. But I do feel like stress management is one of the most important things to kind of highlight with my patients during the perimenopausal period. Because, for one, I mean, that cortisol, if it's dysregulated, definitely can lead to muscle breakdown, right? Cortisol is catabolic, which means that it breaks things down. And so a lot of my women that are running around like crazy, lifting weights, doing the protein will say things like, I'm not gaining muscle, right? I'm literally not gaining muscle. And one of the reasons that that happens is because that high stress and that cortisol will really impact fatty acid metabolism. And so when that happens, we end up with weight gain and fluid retention, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. And so I think that that breathing piece is so fundamentally important because we know that the quickest way to slow down the brain is to slow down the heart. And the best way to slow down the heart is going to be through that breath.
Beautiful. Okay, so we're kind of coming to the end of this one, but we'll definitely continue this discussion. I know it's a very popular topic and a lot of people want, and you're just a wealth of information. Is there anything that you would add to specifically strength training in this period of life?
What do you mean as specifically to strength? Sorry, just tripping on my words. Can you clarify the question a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess is there anything else you'd like to add when it comes to strength training during, when your estrogen
Oh yeah,
levels are
yeah.
lower?
I think there's a lot of myths out there with
Yeah,
regards to strength training that you're going to get super bulky, that you're going to get really big. I have really yet to see that in any woman building muscle. The idea, there's an old myth as well, I think that kind of started in the 80s, this idea that cardio is also best. I think cardio is great. Cardio is good for other reasons in order to build cardiovascular endurance. But I do think that from a weight management standpoint, weight training is best. One of the things that can be frustrating for women is that as they begin active weight training, they may notice that the scale is changing unfavorably. That is a little bit of a hard one for them to swallow because muscle does weigh more than fat. We've known this forever, but it also occupies less space. So as women start weight training, I really, really, really urge them to focus on how they feel, what they're able to do. Maybe carrying 6 grocery bags and a puppy in from the car is easier than it was 6 months ago. Are they able to reach down and stand up at the grocery store easier than they were? And then obviously focusing on inches and how their clothes are fitting. Definitely, definitely, definitely cannot stress enough the importance of protein, the importance of possibly adding creatine in, and really the importance of sleep. Making sure that they are not skimping on sleep, and that goes for everybody. But 7 to 9 hours is what we should be getting in order to allow for that muscle to turn over and repair properly. For somebody who's only getting 6 hours, they're doing themselves a massive disservice if they're working out in the gym and still expecting to see some gains there.
wonderful. Thank you so much. We
You're
will
welcome,
continue,
Luba.
like I said, and we hope to see you all next time. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much to Dr. Paris for joining me and sharing her insights. I hope today's conversation empowers every woman listening to see menopause not as a decline, but as an opportunity to grow stronger, healthier, and more confident. If you'd like to connect with Dr. Paris, you'll find her information in the show notes. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Sage Connections. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a review. It really helps to reach more people interested in these topics. Until next time, take care of your health and your wellness.